Today, we will be talking about child abuse. So, what child abuse is, the different types of child abuse, the signs of child abuse, how to respond if a child comes to you, and the legal requirements of teachers, including the Child, Youth, and Family Enhancement Act. We will also be providing a list of resources at the end of this presentation. So, what is child abuse? To better understand the definition of child abuse, it is important for us to break it down into its components. In Alberta, the first word child refers to any person under the age of 18. As mentioned in the textbook, the definition of child varies across provinces and territories. The second word, abuse, is more abstract and broad, as most statutes use vague terminology to identify a range of specific behaviors and conditions that may constitute child abuse. Again, as mentioned in the textbook, a number of provinces have expanded their definition of what constitutes abuse for the purposes of child protection. The textbook goes into detail about Section 22, Subsection 2 of the Children and Family Services Act of Nova Scotia and its expansive definition of the types of abuse and neglect that may lead to a child being in need of protective services. To sum up Section 22, child abuse as defined by Nova Scotia's Children and Family Services Act includes physical harm or risk of harm due to direct actions or inadequate supervision by a parent or guardian. It also covers sexual abuse or risk thereof, whether by a parent or due to failure to protect the child from others. Medical neglect involves not providing necessary treatment, while emotional abuse includes harmful actions and neglect of emotional needs. The Act addresses general neglect of a child's basic needs, mental, emotional, or developmental neglect, and exposure to domestic violence. It also includes abandonment due to a parent's death or unavailability, refusal or inability to resume care, and failure to address serious or recurrent misconduct by a child. We will go into more detail about the 4 types of child abuse that are mentioned in the Act later on into the presentation. So, to summarize, according to the Canadian Resource Centre for Victims of Crime, child abuse occurs when a parent or caregiver, whether through action or failing to act, causes injury, death, emotional harm, or risk of serious harm to a child. Essentially, child abuse is any action or lack of action by a parent or other responsible adult that results in harm, potential harm, or threat of harm to a child. It encompasses a wide range of harmful behaviors that can impact a child's physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. According to Stats Canada, about 6 in 10, or 59.7% of individuals living in Canada have reported experiencing some type of child maltreatment before they were 15 years old. Again, we will get into more detail about the different types of child abuse. However, it is important to remember that there are both physical and non-physical child maltreatment. Oftentimes, people tend to focus more on the physical types of abuse. However, recent studies have started to show that nearly 1/3, or 32.3% of individuals reported experiencing only non-physical child maltreatment, while 23.3% individuals report experiencing both non-physical and physical child maltreatment, and 4.1% of individuals report experiencing only physical child maltreatment, which was the least prevalent type. These stats are found on Stats Canada, and they're from January 2023, so the numbers may have changed in the last year or so. But these numbers show that non-physical child abuse is very important to keep in mind when understanding child maltreatment in Canada. Also, according to Stats Canada, the different types of child maltreatment did vary by socio-demographic characteristics such as sex at birth and age group. So, for example, females, 34.7%, were more likely than males, 29.9%, to report experiencing only non-physical maltreatment as children. These results show that some groups may be at greater risk than others of experiencing types of child maltreatment. Okay, so now that we have defined what child abuse is, we will be moving on to talk about the 4 different types of child abuse and some of the possible signs that we as educators may notice. So the 4 types of child abuse are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. It is important to remember that these categories can and will overlap, as children can experience more than one type of abuse simultaneously.
Understanding the complexities of abuse in children is essential for future educators and requires a multifaceted approach. This includes vigilant observation, creating a supportive and open classroom environment, fostering strong communication channels with students, and reporting their concerns to child welfare authorities immediately. Physical abuse can be defined as the intentional infliction of physical harm or non-accidental physical injury to a child by a caregiver or another person, which can include actions like hitting, shaking, burning, slapping, or other forms of physical harm. This is often manifested through physical signs such as visible injuries like bruises, burns, or fractures that cannot be reasonably explained, or pattern injury marks such as those caused by a hand, belt, or other objects. Physical abuse often includes behavioral indicators such as the fear of going home, extreme vigilance or aggressive behavior, showing fear towards sudden movements by flinching or shrinking away at the approach of adults, and sudden changes in behavior or school performance. Recognizing these signs is crucial for educators, as early detection can significantly alter the trajectory of a child's life. Sexual abuse involves any sexual activity forced upon a child, encompassing a range of inappropriate behaviors from exposure to sexual acts to physical contact. There are two types: physical, by forcing a child to take part in sexual activities, or non-contact, forcing the child to take part in sexual activities or conversations online or through any non-physical form of communication. Signs of sexual abuse may be less obvious and can include inappropriate sexual knowledge for the child's age, being unusually secretive about online activities or relationships, and sudden changes in emotional behavior. Physical symptoms shown can be the difficulty of walking or sitting, regression to earlier behaviors, sexually transmitted infections, including in the throat, unexplained bruises, bleeding, pain, or irritation in the genital or anal areas. Educators need to be particularly attentive to these signs, as children often feel shame or fear that prevents them from disclosing abuse, as they may not understand that what's happening is considered abuse or that it's wrong for the abuser to do to them.
The next type of abuse that we will discuss today is emotional abuse, also known as psychological abuse. This type of abuse can be more challenging to recognize as it often leaves no visible scars. Emotional abuse occurs when someone uses words or actions to manipulate, control, or isolate another person to violate their sense of self-worth. Emotional abuse includes verbal abuse, which is insulting, belittling, name-calling, yelling, or constantly criticizing the child. This will damage the child's self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Emotional abuse also includes rejecting or ignoring the child, which will lead to feelings of worthlessness and being unloved. Preventing and isolating the child from forming normal social relationships, like with friends, peers, or classmates, is also emotional abuse, as well as encouraging the child to engage in inappropriate or illegal activities or exposing them to harmful behaviors such as violence, drugs, or alcohol at home. Finally, threatening, terrorizing, humiliating, bullying, or intimidating the child, including destroying their belongings, is emotional abuse even if it occurs online, as it makes the child feel constantly scared and unsafe. The effects of emotional abuse can be profound and long-lasting as it impacts a child's mental health, behavior, and development. Some signs that a child might be experiencing emotional abuse includes having low self-esteem, being unconfident, or a lack of self-assurance. They may be constantly apologizing or trying too hard to please others. They struggle to keep their emotions in check. They may have extreme behaviors such as aggression or extreme outbursts. They may also have trouble concentrating, learning, or sleeping. They may find it challenging to establish and maintain trusting relationships with others. Finally, they may lack social skills and be dealing with depression or anxiety from social interactions. As future educators, it is critical to pay attention, recognize, and address any signs of emotional abuse to protect the child's overall well-being. Neglect is the failure of a parent or caregiver to meet a child's basic needs, which can significantly harm the child's health, development, or well-being. Neglect can take a lot of forms, which makes it harder to identify. This is why neglect is the most common form of child abuse. The other types of abuse, including physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, involve harmful actions towards the child. Neglect, on the other hand, involves a lack of action. There are 4 main types of neglect: physical, medical, emotional, and educational. Physical neglect is the failure to provide necessary food, shelter, clothing, supervision, or protection from harm. Either the child's basic needs are not met, they aren't properly supervised, or kept safe. Examples of physical neglect include leaving a child alone for long periods of time without proper supervision, or not providing adequate clothing for weather conditions. Medical neglect is the failure to provide a necessary medical or mental health treatment. Essentially, the child isn't given proper health care. This includes not taking the child to the doctor for a serious illness, not providing necessary medications, or ignoring recommended medical treatments. Emotional or psychological neglect is the failure to meet a child's emotional needs, including the lack of affection, attention, and emotional support. Essentially, a child does not get the nurture and stimulation they need for healthy development. Some examples include ignoring a child's need for affection, humiliating, intimidating, or isolating the child. Educational neglect is the failure to ensure a child's educational needs are met. This includes not enrolling a child in school, allowing the child to miss school without a reasonable explanation, or not providing appropriate special educational services when needed. Again, neglect can be very difficult to spot, so it is important to recognize multiple signs that last for long periods of time, which may indicate there is a serious problem. Some signs of neglect include poor hygiene and appearance, always being hungry, inappropriate clothes for the weather, signs of malnutrition such as being underweight. They may also have other health and developmental problems such as anemia, regular illnesses or infections, untreated injuries, or other medical and dental issues. They may also be getting ignored, humiliated, or intimidated by their caregiver. They don't attend school on a regular basis, or there is a lack of academic progress. They also may be falling asleep in class, find it hard to concentrate or take part in activities. They become withdrawn, depressed, or anxious. They have changes in behavior such as becoming aggressive, clingy, or obsessive, and may even show signs of self-harm. Neglect can have severe and long-lasting effects on a child's physical, emotional, and cognitive development. This includes problems with brain development or engaging in risky behaviors such as drugs, alcohol, dangerous relationships, or breaking the law. Some children and young people are more at risk to suffer neglect than others, such as those that have a disability, are in care, or have complex health needs. Life circumstances can also make it harder for parents and caregivers to meet their child's needs. This includes parents that are dealing with domestic abuse, drugs or alcohol, have learning disabilities, have mental health problems, are living in poverty, or have a lack of support. No matter what the circumstances may be, as educators, we must recognize and address neglect to protect children and ensure their healthy development, even if the child does not realize that they are being neglected.
Case study: abuse, neglect, or nothing to worry about. This issue highlights several critical challenges within educational contexts. For example, mandatory reporting and protocols. Ms. Booty followed the proper protocol by reporting her suspicions about Kim's possible abuse to the school principal and counselor. This step reflects the mandatory reporting obligations educators have. Professional bias and relationship. The principal dismissed Ms. Brody's concern due to his personal and professional relationship with Kim's father, illustrating how biases can interfere with an objective assessment and action. Insufficient evidence and action. The counselor could have taken action without the concrete evidence, highlighting the difficulties in sustaining abuse claims, especially when the child denies the abuse and physical evidence is lacking. Parental influence and denial. When confronted, Kim's father dismissed the concerns as a phase, showing how parental denial can complicate a school authorities' interventions efforts and prevent effective resolutions. And finally, emotional impact on peers and teachers. Mary Sue's distress and Miss Brody's frustrations underscore the broader emotional impact on the school community. This scenario reveals that complexities and obstacles is effectively addressing and reporting child abuse within educational system, emphasizing the need for unbiased responses through training and robust support mechanisms for both educators and students.
Just before this, we discussed the 4 types of abuse. This included physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. We also discussed the possible signs that you might notice in a child experiencing these forms of abuse. Next, we will go through how you should respond if a student discloses child abuse to you, and what steps and considerations that you should take when someone confides in you. It is extremely important that you address this with care, empathy, professionalism, and understanding the protocols that might follow, while also creating a support system for the student. In this slide, we are going to explore how you should respond if a student discloses child abuse to you and what steps and considerations that you should take when someone confides in you. So first and foremost, you're going to want to listen to the student and remain calm and neutral. This is important because the way that you act determines how understood and how safe the child feels. You want to allow the student to tell you what happened in their own words. You want to make sure not to ask leading questions, and this is because leading questions can influence the child. Even if that's not your intention or that's not the case, it can still occur. You don't want to probe for details, and this is just because we are not trained to handle such sensitive matters. As a teacher, your role is to create a safe space for the student to share what happened to them. You want to support and acknowledge the child's feelings. This is important. You want to validate their feelings. You want to validate their emotions. And you especially want to validate that this was the right decision to make to come and confide in you. And going along with that, you want to reassure the child and tell them that this was the right decision. It was a right decision to tell somebody. Children often fear the consequence of telling somebody, but you want to reassure them that it was extremely brave for them to come tell somebody, and it was the right decision. You want to explain that you will need to tell somebody so that they can help with the situation. It's important to be transparent with the student, just because if you don't, they can feel like you broke the trust between you guys, and might not feel like they can trust anyone else in the future. As soon as possible, record what you saw and heard in the child's own words. This is important for when the investigation goes further on. It's important that you kind of write down or record what the child told you in the exact words that they said. Finally, you want to contact the appropriate authorities. So this means contacting CPP, or maybe your school might have someone who is designated for this kind of situation. You want to be able to contact them. It's important that you support the child in need. You want to ensure their safety and their well-being, but you also want to adhere to the legal requirements and the institutional requirements. And this is a situation that you have to handle with care and professionalism, but doing this can create a significant difference in a child's life.
Up until now, we have discussed the 4 different types of child abuse, as well as the signs that are associated with each type, and we have also discussed how you should respond if a student discloses child abuse to you. Next, we are going to discuss what are the actual legal obligations of teachers in regards to child abuse, as well as some things you might want to consider if you are considering reporting suspected child abuse. We are also going to provide a list of resources for if you would like to report suspected child abuse, as well as resources to contact if you are a victim of child abuse. Those in the teaching profession are considered to be mandatory reporters. Under the Child, Youth, and Family Enhancement Act, teachers are legally required to report any suspicions or signs of child abuse and neglect with reasonable cause to the appropriate authorities while they are enacting their professional duties. The first point I'd like to highlight is that there is no clear definition of what constitutes reasonable cause. There is no clear distinction between what is considered to be reasonable cause and what is considered to be conjecture and speculation. This is a concern to those who would like to report suspected child abuse or neglect. This causes concern for those who would like to report suspected child abuse or neglect because they are at risk for being sued for failing to report if they do not, but they can also be sued for reporting suspected child abuse if they cannot show that they had reasonable cause to make the report. Contrary to this, informants are also under no obligation to investigate suspicions of abuse, and they also do not need to have reasonable grounds to believe that the abuse has actually occurred before they make a report. So having reasonable grounds to make the report is something to consider before actually making a report. Another thing that I would like to highlight is that teachers are only mandated reporters while they are in the course of their professional duties, which means that teachers are not mandatory reporters 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But that does mean while teachers are enacting their professional duties, that if they suspect child abuse or they are disclosed to, they are a mandatory reporter and are legally required to report that. We have included a list of agencies that you can contact in order to report if you have reasonable grounds to suspect that child abuse or neglect is occurring or you have been disclosed to by a student. The first authority that most people think of when they go to report child abuse or neglect is their local police department or the RCMP. You can also contact your local Child and Family Service Authority to report child abuse, as well as your local delegated First Nations agency if that is applicable to the situation. The final resource that we have provided is the Child Abuse Hotline, which you can reach at 1-800-387-5437 or KIDS.
If you are a victim of child abuse, please contact 911 immediately. Individuals who are under 19, you can talk to someone anonymously by calling the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. You can also text Connect to 686868 in order to provide you the help that you need.